land tenure system in India. Introduction. Whenever we talk of rural sociology, we are concerned with the agrarian social system, the importance of land, land holding and land relations, including its control and management, assumes significant meaning in rural India. It is because of the fact that a large number of people at the countryside earn their livelihood from land. The village people depend on land directly or indirectly. In India, before the beginning of colonial rule, village land was owned by the community as a whole. It became a private property when the first land settlement was made. The British regime introduced a new revenue system by superseding the traditional right of the village community over the village land. The British Raj thus created two forms of property in land, that is, landlordism in some parts of the country and the individual peasant proprietorship in other. Commenting on the introduction of private property in land, A.R. Desai observes, it was Lord Cornwallis who during his term of office created the first group of landlords in India by introducing the permanent land settlement for Bengal, Bihar and Orissa in 1793. These landlords were created out of the tax farmers in the provinces who had been appointed by the political predecessors of the British rulers to collect revenue from these provinces on a commission basis. The permanent land settlement converted these revenue collectors into too many landlords. Under the terms of the settlement, they had henceforth to make a fixed payment to the government of the East India Company. Thus, for the first time, land ceased to be owned by the community. Second, it became a part of private property. Third, there emerged an intermediary in the form of Jagirdar between the tenant and the government. This was a watershed in the history of agrarian system. Now let us discuss about the objectives of this lesson. Number 1, to discuss about the land tenure system during British period. Number 2, to discuss about the land tenure system in the post-independent India. Now let us discuss what exactly meant by land tenure system. Land is held all over the world under different tenure situations. Holding of land depends on different reasons. Ownership or exclusive control by an individual is not the only concept under which land is held and used. If you look from Indian point of view, ownership of land is a Western idea. As discussed earlier in India, ownership of land before the permanent land settlement always rested with the community. However, in Western world, individual ownership of land was recognized both by the state and the community. Theoretically speaking, notwithstanding India or any other country, land is viewed as a traditional economic factor of production, including labor and capital. In this broad classification, land is defined to include all natural properties but to exclude invested capital. capital is unrealistic. Same capital is so firmly blended with land that it is impossible to separate the two. The important fact to bear in mind is that no factor is productive alone. Each requires some or the others in order to be productive. Land alone is not productive. It includes a number of other inputs. In contemporary times, science and technology have resulted in the vast array of new production functions, which have largely transformed the productivity and use of land. It is this general conception of land tenure system that we have included technology and improved agricultural inputs for an all-round analysis of agriculture. It is the land which constitutes the major source of livelihood for the village people. But all the peasants who live in villages do not own their individual land. According to one estimate, nearly 3/5 of world people derive their livelihood from agriculture. Out of this, most do not own land on which they live and work. The reality is that many of the peasants purchase rights of cultivation and occupancy from others. In return, from hide rights in land, these people pay the landowners or their intermediaries a share of the produce, a fixed amount of the produce or personal services or some combination of these. Those people are the tenants. It is said that throughout the world, tenants and their families probably constitute as many as 2/5 of the population engaged in agriculture. Most of the tenants aspire to ownership of their lands. Therefore, tenancy may well be appraised in terms of how well it provides tenants with opportunities to gain experience, acquire capital, and make decisions in the process of acquiring land ownership. On the other hand, many tenants are not likely to become owners in the foreseeable future. Now let us discuss about the emergence of tenants during the British period. A tenant is one who cultivates the land on certain conditions. Most of the agriculturists in our country are tenants. The emergence of tenant goes back to the British period when in 1793 the permanent land settlement was made. The Jamindari system, which emerged from land settlement, was an intermediary system. The system created the class of tenants who suffered from oppression at the hands of the Jamindars. It was a historical emergence found for the first time in Indian agrarian history. In the native states, also known as princely states, the Jagirdar worked as an intermediary between the tenant and the central princely rule. In these states, Jagirdar was the counterpart of Jamindar. The status of tenant in pre-independent India was highly deplorable. A.R. Desai very aptly sketches the oppressive condition of tenants during this period. In course of time, a series of intermediaries developed between the Jamindar and the cultivating tenant, whose condition thereby increasingly deteriorated. The Bengal Tenancy Acts of 1859 and 1885 aimed at ameliorating the position of the tenant. However, the legislation did not accomplish much. The mass of tenants continued to live in an increasingly worsening condition. However, a few of them who owned larger patches of land rose to the level of rich peasants, while a large number of them were reduced to the status of poor peasants, tenants of absentee landlords, or land laborers. This process of differentiation of the peasant proprietors grew at an accelerated rate since the rate of impoverishment of the peasantry increased. The colonial period witnessed, on one hand, the impoverishment of the tenant, and on the other hand, differentiation and disintegration of the peasant proprietors. As a result of this process, there emerged in rural India the class of absentee landlords on one hand and the lower peasantry and agricultural laborers on the other. Now let us discuss about the land tenure system during British period. During the British period, there were 4 types of land tenure systems in India. They were: number 1, Jamindari system; number 2, Jagirdari system; number 3, Mahalwari system; number 4, Raitwari system. Now let us discuss about these land tenure systems. The first one is the Jamindari system. Jamindari system of tenancy prevailed in Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Bombay Presidency, and Tamil Nadu. Under this system, one or more persons owned a village and were responsible for the payment of revenue. This system, also created by the British, was highly exploitative. It also encouraged absentee landlords who more than often enhanced the rate of land rent. The actual tiller of land was always in fear of his ejection from land because he was not the owner of the land. No land development efforts were made. The Jamindar was interested to realize the land rent from the tiller. As part of land reform programs, Jamindari system has been abolished by the various state governments in the country. Then second one is Jagirdari system. The Jagirdari tenancy system was found mainly in the former princely states of Rajasthan. Under this system, Jagirs were granted to certain military commanders, ministers, and courtiers who took the revenue for their own support or for the military force which they were obliged to maintain. The Jagirdari system thus created a class of unproductive mass of people by granting them Jagir lands. K.L. Sharma informs that the Jagirdars extorted and extracted as many as 175 types of taxes and cases. Tikandars and Jagirdars levied these taxes not only to maintain the feudal setup but also to meet expenses of individual members of the royal family and on cultural, religious, and other miscellaneous activities. The Rajasthan Jagir Abolition Act was passed in February 1952 and implemented in 1954. This put an end to Jagirdari tenancy system in Rajasthan and elsewhere in other parts of the states of the Union. Then third is the Mahalwari system. This kind of tenancy was introduced during the British rule. It was first started in Agra and Awadh and was later on extended to Punjab. Under this system, land was held jointly by co-sharing bodies of village communities. This body was treated as jointly and severally liable for the land revenue. A typical example of the Mahalwari tenancy system was widely prevalent in Punjab. It was a kind of joint landlordism and distinguished from individual landlordism under Jamindari system. In a typical joint village, the owners were themselves cultivators. In some cases, land was cultivated by tenants who paid rent either in cash or in kind. Best results of cultivation were obtained when a peasant proprietor possessed enough land to cultivate with the help of his family. The Mahalwari system of intermediaries was abolished as a part of land reforms taken up in 50s. The next one is the Raitwari system. This kind of land tenancy was first introduced by the British in Madras in 1772. Later on, it was extended to Bombay Presidency. Under this tenancy system, every registered holder of land was recognized as its proprietor. He paid revenue directly to the government. He was at liberty to sublet his property or to transfer it by gift, sale or mortgage. He could not be ejected from his land till he paid the revenue. Absence of sub-infeudation and the cultivator's direct relation with the government was the main advantage of this tenancy system. Yet another advantage of this system was that the proprietor of the land took all interest for improving the land and its irrigation facilities. But the inherent drawback of the system was that the land was sublet to the landless peasants. In the long run, the Raitwari system created a group of peasants who were subordinate to the proprietor of the land. The Raitwari system was abolished by the land reform measures. Now let us discuss about the land tenure system in the post-independent India. It must be observed that in India, the agricultural sector constitutionally is the subject of the state. Land taxation thus is determined by the state government. Because of this statutory position, there is much variation in agricultural tenancy in the country. Yet another important aspect of tenancy in India is that it is shaped by the historical and cultural forces of a particular region or part of the country. Historically, variation in tenancy could be explained by the fact that the colonial forces in British India and feudal forces in princely states also determine the form and extent of tenancy. However, at a broader plane, it could be said that there are 5 variations of tenants in the country. Number 1, cash tenants. They pay a fixed cash rent for the use and occupancy of their land. Next one is share cash tenants. They pay part of their rent in cash and part in the share of crops. Third, crop share tenants. They pay a share of the crops only. The next one, croppers. They pay a share of the crops but usually work under the close supervision of landlord or his agent. Other and unspecified tenants. We have argued that there is much variation in agricultural tenancy. The classes of tenants which we have given above are not exhaustive. As a matter of fact, the sharecropper is both a tenant and also a landowner of a patch of land. K.L. Sharma, who has worked on the problem of feudalism and peasant movements in Rajasthan, argues that there has been much variation in the realm of tenancy in Rajasthan itself. He says that all through the country, the number of tenants has been increasing, leaving aside a sum. In Kerala, the agricultural laborers have increased over the last 2 decades. The interstate variations in regard to types of tenancy have been elaborately examined by Lakshmi Narayan and Tyagi. On a broader plane, Lakshmi Narayan, Tyagi and Sharma find 4 kinds of tenancies in different parts of the country. These types may be categorized as below. Number 1, crop sharing tenants. Number 2, paying cash rent tenants. Third, paying fixed product or kind tenants. 4, unspecified tenants, and other than the above 3. A.R. Desai has studied historically the rise of new social classes of peasantry in India. His approach to the study of tenancy or tenants is based on Marxian perspective. He has taken into consideration the tenancy variations in India on a broader plane. Historically, as a result of the creation of Jamindari and Raitwari system, a new class of peasant proprietors emerged in India. While the Jamindari system was a link between the tenant and the state, the Raitwari system included the peasant proprietors who were themselves owners of the land. Desai has made 3 divisions of the class of peasant proprietors. Number 1, upper class landowners having big patches of land. Number 2, middle class landowners having land ownership at the intermediate level. Third, lower strata, including marginal and small farmers. With the passage of time, the number of lower classes of peasantry increased. A large number of them were reduced to the status of agricultural laborers and paupers. What is important here is that tenancy variation is not new to rural India. It has been in operation since the period of Mughal Empire. The issue of tenancy variation in contemporary times could be seen from the empirical studies made by John Bremen, Andri Bethille, Daniel Thorner and others. The variations in tenancy as given by Bremen, Sharma, Bethille and others could be summarized in some categories. For instance, tenancy on a broader plane has 2 divisions, and more or less it includes most parts of the country. These 2 divisions are number 1, owners of land, and number 2, non-owners of land. The subdivision of owners of land consists of number 1, large landowners, and number 2, middle landowners, and third, lower landowners. This third subdivision is further divisioned into number 1, small landowners, and number 2, marginal landowners. The second division of tenancy, that is non-owners of land do not have any land in their possession. In this category too, there are further subdivisions such as number 1, share cash tenants, number 2, crop share tenants, number 3, cash tenants, and 4, agricultural laborers. Summary. The study of rural sociology, in fact, is the study of agrarian social system. The social and cultural life of a village is largely determined by the relations of people to the land. It is in this broader context that we have examined the status of landowners, their types, and the status of tenants, including their variations. On a broader plane, it should be said that a larger portion of land is cultivated by tenants who are not the owners of land. The relations between landowner, tenants, and labor are crucial in the process of production from the farm. The reality is that agriculture is the main source of employment and income in rural society. Rural sociology basically studies the relations between the landowner, sharecropper, laborer, and above all, the market system where the farm produce is exchanged. Ironically, the land owned by the people is not in equal size for all the cultivators. The land size varies from peasant to peasant. There are peasants who own larger chunks of land, and at the same time there are peasants who are marginal only. In other words, land is not equally distributed. The unequal distribution of land creates sharp stratification in the rural society.